require the Department of Public Safety to regulate the program, register physicians, and mandated the DPS to license 30 dispensary organizations to cover the state, and those being Fluent, Compassionate Cultivation, and Surtera. Fast forward to 2019, there were 3 medical cannabis bills seeking to expand the program, 2 of which had increases in THC, and then there was HB 3703. That was more of a compromise bill. It did not raise the THC, so the THC is still at 0.5, but it did increase the qualifying conditions and remove the requirement that patients receive approvals from 2 neurologists. So that was, in our opinion, a step in the right direction, even though it didn't go as far as we had initially hoped. So HB 3703, and that's the law we're operating under now, increased the conditions to include epilepsy, MS, spasticity, ALS, autism, terminal cancer, and incurable neurodegenerative diseases. The incurable neurodegenerative diseases was a category of diseases, and part of the legislation had the Texas Department of State Health Services to determine what those were. And so in December of this past year of 2019, they came out with a rule that included around 100 diseases, but one special point of that rule was that it allowed for a petition process. If the disease that a physician thought should be included, they could petition the agency for that to be included. So it's not a static list, which is a great thing. There's some fluidity that can be incorporated, which is a really positive thing, I think, for the program. So let's see. So take that by the numbers. The last time we checked, I asked DPS, I think at the end of 2019, there were around 1,300 patients and 180 qualified physicians. That is almost a 90 or almost 100% increase over the beginning of 2019 when we started the legislative session. So it remains to be seen why those numbers are the way they are. Was it because of those additional conditions that were added, or more people are, entering the program, more physicians? So we thought that was a positive thing. It's certainly moving in the right direction, but we know it's limited because of the THC level that Texas has. So I think that's my little update, and we're going to have questions toward the end. So if you have any specific questions for me, I'd be happy to answer them, or you can find me during the break, and I'd be happy to visit with you about those.
Great, thank you for that information, Esme. Our next speaker, Dr. Olga, is a native Texan born and raised in Houston. Dr. Olga earned her medical doctorate from the University of Texas Medical Branch, where she was a member of the Humanism Honor Society, eventually graduating with honors in Burns research. She completed an emergency medicine residency at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, where she presided as chief resident. Today, she practices as a board-certified emergency physician in ERs throughout Texas, California, and Louisiana. Dr. Olga began the path of naturopathy, the study and practice of natural medicine, after exploring native medicine in Central America, South America, and parts of Africa. As a naturopath, she gravitates towards herbalism, incorporating many herbs into traditional Western medicine regimes. Medical cannabis plays a pivotal role in her recommendations for treatment of almost every ailment, especially for preventative care. Currently, Dr. Olga serves as a medical director for Refined Pharmaceuticals, a CBD pharmaceutical company located in Houston. In 2018, Dr. Olga joined the Texans For Safe Access Board, an organization of patients, medical professionals, and scientists and concerned citizens promoting safe and legal access to cannabis for therapeutic use and research, nationally and statewide. Dr. Olga will be speaking with us currently for this presentation, and she'll also be coming back to join us for a panel discussion this afternoon. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Olga.
in the ER, most patients call me Dr. Obie, and I don't like that. So Shivawn did give an introduction, but I tell all my patients, before you put your hands in your life in anyone's hands, you need to know who you're dealing with. So I'm going to tell you who I am. Not only am I Dr. Olga, but I'm born and raised in Houston, Texas, and I went to the University of Houston because my parents made me. My father chose my major, and so I graduated with a degree in biochemical and biophysical science because I am the firstborn daughter of a Nigerian father, and so he chooses everything for me. After that, I went on to the University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston, where I got my doctorate, and I graduated with honors in burns research because I thought I was going to do plastic surgery. That changed a lot because I fell in love with the practice of medicine called emergency medicine. So I went on to the University of Alabama at Birmingham, a major trauma center in Alabama, and I graduated from a residency program as the chief resident. I went on to get my board certification because I thought I loved emergency medicine that much. And so I completed my board certification in 2014. And then after that, I hit a roadblock. Because what I have discovered is that medical school and residency teaches you how to treat patients, but it does not teach you how to heal. That's not what we focus on. And I really was struggling with seeing patients in the ER, that fear, that concern, the begging, please don't let me suffer, please don't let me die, and realizing that the only way you can answer that question is to heal someone of their disease, not just treat it. And so I realized I needed to learn more. Yes, I needed to learn more, even after all of that schooling. So I decided to start traveling. In the first year of medical school, I was fortunate to go to a country called Peru. So after I finished residency, I went back, and I went back again, and I went back again, and I went back again. And it's because the natives were doing something different. They could not afford to treat disease. They could not afford to keep treating the same condition. They realized very early on, millennia ago, that they had to heal themselves because they couldn't afford the medicine that we have in the United States. And so they taught me something called traditional medicine. Non-traditional medicine, which is herbal medicine or plant-based medicine. And so I brought that back with me to the United States, and I incorporated it into my allopathic studies. And so I started studying more from other countries like Prague, Israel, India, Congo, Jamaica, Japan, Israel, Central and South American countries, and even Canada. And I incorporated what I studied, I incorporated the places that I traveled, and I merged the two together to create something that I call lifestyle medicine. And I realized that that was actually a practice. From there, I joined forces with some other healthcare professionals, and we formed a company called Refined Pharmaceuticals, where I serve as the medical director. Refined Pharmaceuticals is a company that's focused on innovative ways of teaching patients how to heal in the United States. I then joined forces with another company in San Francisco called James Henry SF, and they are a medical and non-medical marijuana company focused on lifestyle medicine. I began studying for board certification in lifestyle medicine, and I'm currently board eligible for board certification in lifestyle medicine. And finally, I became an approved Texas compassionate use physician as I learned more and more about medical marijuana and its benefits. So now I sit on a few boards. One is Texans For Safe Access, which we know is a wonderful nonprofit organization focused on ensuring safe and legal access to marijuana for patients here in the United States. I'm also on the board of the Minority Cannabis Business Association, which is a nonprofit organization focused on social equity where it concerns marijuana laws. Refined Pharmaceuticals, James Henry, and the Texas Hemp Fest, which is focused on allowing non-qualifying patients the ability to have access to safe and legal hemp-based products. So now let's focus, now that you know a little bit about me. What exactly is cannabis? And I choose the word cannabis on purpose. So cannabis is the parent name for the group of plants that are both hemp and marijuana. That means cannabis is on top. Hemp and marijuana are the subsets. Hemp contains, by law, less than 0.3% THC, whereas marijuana contains a considerable amount more. Both hemp and marijuana contain CBD, and both hemp and marijuana contain THC. So now that we know what cannabis is, why cannabis? Why does it even matter? In order to answer that question, we start with the human body and the plant. And over the millennia, we know that the plant jives eerily well with the human body. So well, so much better than most every other plant, that it's able to affect multiple organ systems without fatal outcomes. And this is because of a system called the endocannabinoid system. In medical school, I will tell you, I had never heard about this system. And I studied a lot. I still have all my books. This system is not there. I abbreviate it, and so does everyone else. We'll call it the ECS from now on. So the endocannabinoid system is a wonderful system because it is responsible for something called homeostasis. Homeostasis is our biological balancing system. What does that mean? In order for life to happen, things have to be in balance between chaos and death. It has to happen that way. In order for things to move, there has to be a force. The endocannabinoid system is the biological answer to balancing every single thing that lives between chaos and death. So, tell me more, you say. I'll tell you more. The endocannabinoid system is made of three major components that I want everyone to remember if you don't know it already. Cell receptors, those sit on the cell wall. Every single cell, brain cells, skin cells, neural cells, every single cell has a cell wall, and they have receptors on them. Second component, endocannabinoids. Those are the pieces that affect those receptors. Our major endocannabinoids we're going to talk about today are anandamide and 2-AG, endocannabinoids. And enzymes. Enzymes are the third major component. They act like scissors that cut down the endocannabinoids so that we can recycle them, get them out, and keep balance in check. The two major enzymes are FAAH for anandamide and NAGL for 2-AG. Okay. When these three components are working in synergy, they allow the body to maintain or to regulate water balance, body temperature, neurological function, nutrient balance, blood flow, immune system responses, and heart rate. So we'll start with the major receptors. We're going to talk about two of them today. There are others. The first one we're going to talk about is CB1 receptor. It's found primarily in the central nervous system, which includes the brain and the spinal cord. The CB1 receptor, when it is affected or regulated, it affects neurological function. When it is dysfunctional in any way, meaning there's no receptor, the receptor is damaged, or the components that affect the receptor are not there, or even the cell wall does not have a normal integrity, it can lead to psychological and neurodegenerative disorders, all encompassing neurological dysfunction. CB2 receptors are found primarily in the periphery and especially in the immune system. So that means when the CB2 receptor is dysfunctional in any way, you will have changes or dysregulation of immunity, which can lead to autoimmune disease, allergies and asthma, inflammatory pain, and I would argue most every other pain. It also gives us ideas for promising advents in vaccines and immune boosting, and the treatment of infections and especially sepsis. And so the CB2 receptor is a receptor that is also very valuable in our endocannabinoid system. So there are 6 major enzymes for anandamide and 2-AG alone within our endocannabinoid system. 6 major enzymes. There are 5 other known cannabinoids besides 2-AG and anandamide, so 7 total that we know of. And there are 3 endocannabinoid-like compounds. So on top of the endocannabinoids, there are endocannabinoid-like compounds that we make inside of our bodies. This equals to a very complex system that 1, is not studied by physicians on a regular basis, but 2, keeps us alive and healthy. So what do our endocannabinoids do? The 2 we're going to talk about, remember, are anandamide and 2-HU. So to talk about that, we start with the cell receptors. Anandamide comes into play with the CB1 receptors, and it binds directly the CB1 receptor, which then results in regulations of pain, memory, mood, appetite, cognition, and emotions. And I want you to remember that because later on it's going to really become apparent why our phytocannabinoids are so effective. The other endocannabinoid is 2-HU, which primarily binds at the CB2 receptor and the CB1 receptor. And because of its binding, it is responsible for regulating, again, mood, but also sleep, bone health, reproduction, memory, immune system health, pain. So with these 2 endocannabinoids, we can see why the endocannabinoid system is so effective at maintaining homeostasis. Where does cannabis come in? And this is why this is so exciting. So we'll start again with the plant. And to break down the components of the plant, we know that cannabis is made up of flavonoids, terpenes, and cannabinoids. Flavonoids are responsible for giving a plant, any plant including cannabis, its color or pigment. We also know that flavonoids exert therapeutic effects. Terpenes are responsible for giving cannabis in all plants their smell, their aroma. We know for a fact terpenes also exert a therapeutic effect. Terpenes examples are things like mint, that minty flavor you get out of peppermint. We also know that mint helps to open up our sinus passages. So we know that terpenes also help to exert therapeutic effects from cannabis. And we'll talk about cannabinoids and their therapeutic effect here in a second. So that's the breakdown of the components of the cannabis plant. So where do our phytocannabinoids come in? So we'll start here with THC. And I put this picture up so that you can see a crude rendering of how similar anandamide is to THC in shape. Anandamide at the top looks like a diamond. THC at the bottom looks like a triangle. But the base is what is shared by those 2 compounds. And so they are both able to bind to the CB1 receptor. They don't bind exactly the same, which is why THC tends to cause us to feel a lot more euphoria than anandamide. But understand that anandamide does affect things like mood and cognition. Therefore, THC can also affect the same things. And I just drew this so that you guys can see how similar the binding really is inside of our bodies. So that's why THC works. What about CBD? CBD works in a more indirect way. One way that we know that CBD works is by affecting the enzyme that breaks down anandamide. And the way CBD does it is by inhibiting that enzyme, therefore naturally increasing anandamide's internal levels. We can see now why CBD is less likely to cause a high, because it instead increases our natural endocannabinoids to allow things like our mood to be lifted or sleep to be better regulated. The other way that CBD is known to be effective is by affecting the receptor that THC binds to, which is the CB1 receptor. It is thought to change the shape of that receptor so that THC cannot bind to it. As a result, you will excrete or release THC in either your urine or your stool, and it will not be allowed to cause you as much of a high or as much of the effects that THC would otherwise have. And so CBD indirectly affects the THC efficacy by affecting its receptor. So the question I get from patients a lot is, are there other plant cannabinoids that I can use besides THC? The answer is yes. I just put up 10. There are over 80 other cannabinoids from the cannabis plant. And when I say cannabis, to the top left, there's a molecule there called THCA. And then the bottom right, THCV. I put this up so that we can really understand why scientists, physicians, pharmacists, massage therapists, enthusiasts, caregivers are so hell-bent on making sure the law is expanded. Because there's medical benefit to other cannabinoids besides just CBD and THC. And when we express that we should only use 2 of them, we are deficient the other ones that are also therapeutic. And so the idea is not to allow for the plant to be used so that we can get high. It's so the plant can be used so that we can get therapeutic benefit. And so that's what this slide is for. So the question I get also so much, how do, okay, Dr. Olga, okay, how do I get it? Not so fast. First, we have to understand, what are we talking about getting? In the United States, marijuana is considered a Schedule I drug. So what that means is that the United States says that there is currently no accepted medical use, and it does have a high potential for abuse. And as you can see on this list, amongst the other great Schedule I's like heroin, methylphenol, some that you can't even name, marijuana sits right there, as if it's in the wrong detention. It shouldn't be in detention. It shouldn't be in this class, but it is. And as a result, it is illegal. It is prosecutable, and you cannot use it, even though we saw in the previous slide that there are medical benefits. I put this up just so you can see what these Schedule II drugs are, the ones that are not quite in detention. These are all of our opiates, including fentanyl. And we know that opiates are the #1 prescription killers in America. And yet, they're usable. Just tidbits. Okay, so the DEA says there's currently no accepted medical benefit. And yet there are 2 FDA-approved versions of THC, Navalone and Dronabinol. And so there's a contradiction of whether or not there's medical benefit. And I just put that up just so I can put bugs in everyone's ear. And I put this back up to show that we know, as scientists, that there are medical benefits of at least 10 phytocannabinoids. Moving on, I'm done beating that dead horse. So what exactly is legal? The law says industrial hemp is legal. Industrial hemp is defined as less than 0.3% THC from the non-cannabis sativa plant, so it cannot come from cannabis sativa. It also says medical CBD or low THC cannabis is legal if you qualify, and that means less than 0.5% THC. My next slide is pretty redundant from Esme's slide, but it is to show you that on the congress.gov website, industrial hemp, less than 0.3% THC, is removed from the Schedule I class and is legal for sale, therapeutic use, and research. The Texas Compassionate Use Program further helped us to understand that low-dose THC prescribed by certain physicians is legal, and in 2019, they said that it can be prescribed by most physicians, and 8 qualifying conditions were added. And so we know what those qualifying conditions are. And so next, I want to make sure that if you're asking, how do I get it, you know how to do it step by step if you're a qualifying patient. So if you saw any of your disease processes on that previous list, you potentially qualify, and this slide is for you. Step by step. Step 1, go to this website link. Click on it and find a physician near you, or choose a telemedicine provider that is versed in your condition who is willing to register you on under the current system. If that physician is not an approved provider, tell them to apply. If they have treated any of your conditions before, they qualify to register you. All they have to do is go to the website and fill out the application, and they will likely be approved. And then your doctor can qualify you. Then go to your scheduled appointment, obviously. Then your doctor will enter in your information, including your Social Security information. If you're a caregiver or a guardian, they will enter your information as well at that time. And then you're registered. Then you choose a dispensary. Right now, only Compassionate Cultivation and Soterra are up and running. printed up for you. After that, your medication is either carried out, if it's from one dispensary in Texas, or it's hand-delivered to you. And then after that, you just maintain your 90-day follow-up, which is standard for most every physician because low THC cannabis is still considered a controlled substance. So how much will all this cost? That is a great question. Initial visits with physicians range anywhere from $75 to $450 for the first visit. Every follow-up is every 3 months standard, and that ranges between $7,500 and $300 per visit, depending on the physician. Some physicians do accept insurance, some of them do not. So that means that your visit may only require a copay, or it may require full payment out of pocket. Medication ranges from $75 per bottle to $342 per bottle. And the cost of your medication depends on your supply and how quickly it runs out. So that depends on how much you use and how often you use it. Where do you get your medications from? I made this chart for you after calling all of the dispensaries, getting the costs and what they offer. So Compassionate Cultivation is based in Texas. If you want to go to that dispensary, you can. They are very friendly and open to walk-ins. What I would suggest is you call them first to make sure your medication is in stock and make sure that your registration is in the system before you go. They do accept cash, check, debit, wire transfers, and some flexible spending accounts and health savings accounts. You must know your PIN, and you must verify with them beforehand before you can expect they will accept that. They have 3 different tinctures. I put these tinctures up there so that you understand, and I'm going to break it down to you in a second. And their tinctures vary by cost, as you can see. Certera is Florida-based, so they do not have a dispensary location in Texas. They only hand deliver, and their hand delivery is free with the purchase of your medication. And they only accept CanPay, ACH, and cash. CanPay is an app that you would have to download to your cell phone in order to be able to use it. And it's basically like Cash App or Venmo or Zelle. And they only offer a 20-to-1 tincture. So to break down the tinctures, usually I dose patients by either THC or CBD content. So for example, I have a patient that takes 60 milligrams of CBD 4 times a day for her spasticity. That's 240 milligrams of CBD a day. Looking at the Compassionate Cultivation side, you can see that there's 1-to-1, 3-to-1, and 20-to-1. For her, I recommend a 1-to-1 tincture. 240 milligrams of a 150 milligram bottle is going to last her half of a day. That's $75 for half a day. $150 a day. What's 150 times 30? Who can afford that? No one can. The fortunate thing for her is that 1-to-1 does help. The unfortunate thing is that she cannot afford it. So she literally can see her salvation and she can't touch it. This is what our program, although noble, is still needing for most patients. I put this up here also to make sure that people understand that there are patients that only require 2.5 milligrams of CBD. And so some of their medication is quite affordable. And if you have a health savings account, your medication will go quite far. So for those of you who find that your recommendations are low dose, this is the program for you. For very high doses, there still needs to be a solution. Oh, and Consortium or Fluid is not taking Texas patients at this time. Additional tidbits: pediatric patients might qualify for medication assistance through some assistance programs that are called Any Baby Can, Ascension, and there's another one called Shannon, but I was not able to get a hold of them, so I didn't put it up here. What you would do is find them on the website or call them and see if they would be able to help you financially with your pediatric patient. Travel safe. It is extremely important that you know that if your product contains THC, it is still federally illegal. That means flying with it is a big risk. travel with them, they put their recommendation directly with the medication. If they have to fly, they take a chance and put it with their medication in a check bag. That doesn't help if you're on a 14-hour flight, but that is what they do. I cannot advocate for traveling or taking your medication across state lines, but I will say that people are doing it. So, what if you don't qualify? You are not left out if you don't qualify. You can still use industrial hemp, which is only 0.2% less than the legal low-dose CBD. Low-dose CBD. So always ask for ingredients in that case because that market is not regulated. What that means is that anybody can put anything into any bottle and put anything on the label and sell it to you. Until it's regulated, ask about ingredients. Ask for valid certificates of analysis. And I wish I could put an example up here, but when you say it to the store, if they look at you like, walk out. Everyone that is legitimate knows what a certificate of analysis is. It should include analysis of mycobacteria or microorganisms, moisture, and heavy metals, as well as the content of the cannabinoids. Find your dose. That means you can use a dosing calculator, which are found on some websites, or you can consult with your healthcare provider. If they do not know anything about cannabis, then you can find a healthcare provider that does. And then whenever you get your medication, since you will be working generally on your own, start low and go slow, or grow slow. So in summary, I know I said a lot. First things first, the endocannabinoid system is why it all works. It's why it works better than any other plant-based medicine or any other pharmaceutical. Hemp and marijuana are both cannabis. We should not be trying to separate it. Hemp is legal, marijuana is not yet. Marijuana definitely has medical benefit, and I'm tired of not saying it. It definitely does, period. Needs more research, needs to be available. Current qualifiers can use low THC cannabis up to 0.5%. Non-qualifiers can use industrial hemp up to 0.3%. Current qualifiers can now order from one of 2 companies in Texas. And Fluent is currently not accepting Texas patients. Pickup and delivery medications are both available. Medication can be expensive and insurance does not cover medications. And follow-up every 90 days is standard. Finally, ask your doctor, period. The only way doctors are going to get on board is if you're asking. If you don't ask, then they will stay ignorant. Ask your doctor today about medical marijuana, medical hemp, CBD, I don't care what you call it, ask them. They need to know that this is a popular thing. Finally, these are places that you can find me. If you need a physician to give you recommendations about industrial hemp, or about medical marijuana, or about Texas Compassionate Use qualified conditions, you can find me. I'm always answering questions, and I do it for free. I don't care what time of day it is. You can find me on LinkedIn. Our website on Refined Pharmaceuticals has a dosing calculator that's free for use for industrial hemp doses. It is not for medical marijuana CBD. And the Texans For Safe Access Contact Us website, you can also find me there. And that's it. Thank you. patients are not asking questions. And so when questions are asked, generally we're really hungry to read about it because we have big egos in Texas. And I'm not trying to be funny. So I think the biggest issue is that we're technically in the closet and we don't realize it. Because when I talk to my colleagues, they are always asking like, oh, is there a class I can take? Is there, how can I, what did you do? So I feel like Texas physicians are open, but I think the issue is that we're not getting enough questions asked from patients.
Hi, Dr. Olga. Hi, thank you for your presentation. Just a point of clarification on the CBD altering shape of the receptors, thereby, I guess, how you were explaining it is that it alters the shape of the receptors, thereby the THC molecules working can't attach to it. So in theory, if that happens, are you saying that balancing the CBD, that altering shape, I guess it induces less of a psychoactive reaction?
Yeah, so that's the thought. And research is still being conducted. But that's the thought that the CBD would augment the shape of the THC receptor and therefore change the height of your experience with THC. It would also augment what THC would otherwise cause. And so this is why when you see those ratios, 3 to 1, 20 to 1, 1 to 1, it actually matters because you want to know how much you want CBD to modulate THC's effect and how much you want CBD to have its own effect on its own.
So how does that impact the entourage effect theory, or does it?
It absolutely does. So he's asking about a phenomenon called the entourage effect, which if I can be crude, entourage is like your posse. And so, or basically like a choir that's singing without the orchestra. What do you call that? Acapella. And so the crescendo, decrescendo, and all of the ways that the sounds mingle in together, that's considered an entourage effect. And so CBD and THC do affect the endocannabinoid system's own entourage effect, which is the mixture of the receptors, the enzymes, the cannabinoids, and all of their exerted outcomes. And so when CBD is affecting the receptor, it will lessen certain outcomes and heighten its own outcomes. So CBD will also have its own effect on the endocannabinoid system and simultaneously decrease or lessen the effects of THC in theory. And so that definitely will affect the entourage effect. But essentially it's like being on a mixer board. You can increase the volume here, increase the acoustics here, you can increase the bass here. That's how CBD and THC can work together to augment the entourage effect. So it does absolutely affect it.
Can you hear me? So I'm interested in different delivery mechanisms, like we have vaporization or eating it or rectally. Do you have any opinions on those different delivery methods today? I mean, obviously, inhalation's quick, but it goes away faster. Is there any knowledge about the different therapeutic or the different delivery mechanisms impact the medicine in any way?
Absolutely. So my opinion on delivery mechanisms is that all should be available, period. If we start to say that only edibles or only oil should be legal, then we run into issues with patients that maybe don't have a sufficient gut system, patients that might have issues with oral absorption that can only actually take inhaled delivery, or patients that have pharyngeal cancer that can't ingest anything at all and they have to take it rectally. And so first, my opinion is that all routes should be allowed, period. Medicine is individualized. It is not based off of one group. It's based off of the individual. The other thing is that in one patient, they may require several routes to control their condition. So inhaled is a quick on, it off, but also higher bioavailability versus ingest it. What that means is that if I inhale it, more of the activated substance gets into my system faster, but also in a higher concentration than if I put it rectally. Also, it is affected, and I know Dr. Shivawn will be talking more about the pharmacology of this plant, but if we take it in different routes, it is absorbed into the bloodstream at different percentages. It stays in for different periods of time, and it also exerts a more varying therapeutic effects. And so even in one organism or one person, there may be a requirement of different routes of the medication to be taken. My best example is I have a prostate cancer patient that was diagnosed with stage 4 prostate cancer that was on his immunotherapy that was not receiving any relief. The cancer was still growing. So we started him on rectal, high-dose rectal 1-to-1 CBD to THC. We started, whole plant. It wasn't 1-to-1, whole plant rectal. We started him on oral 3 times a day and vaporized for his pain and nausea. Because of that, we were able to see significant benefit, and it's anecdotal, where he's now considered in remission from stage 4. And I strongly believe it's because of the multiple routes of cannabis. I really feel strongly that if he were just vaporizing, he would not have seen those outcomes. So I strongly believe in multiple routes per patient.
Hi, in the back. So thank you again for your presentation and for the information. I just wanted to clarify a couple of things. I think you just answered my second question with your last comment. So first, I refer to CBD as like a neurological neutralizer, bringing homeostasis as like a general overview. Is this accurate? Way to perceive it?
I think that's really poetic, first of all. A neurological neutralizer.
I feel like a neutralizer can be taken as it brings things to neutral versus not killing things. Like if there's something slow, it brings it up, if it's high, it brings it down. Sort of.
Yeah, I mean, there are some people that I've spoken with that think of CBD almost like in a hormone-like way, where it acts more like a finger that turns on and off the dimmer switch. You know, without enough research on how CBD actually works in vivo inside of the human body, it's hard to say if it actually works in like a dimmer switch, like a neutralizing switch. But I can say that when it's ingested, patients do feel like they're more even versus when they ingest THC.
Thank you.
So going back to the delivery methods, I'm wondering if it has the same effects. Like I know when you consume edibles, it converts the THC from delta 9 to 11 hydroxyl or whatever it's called. When we talk about like the cancer fighting effects of THC, is it the same for both forms of THC, or do the different forms have different effects?
Oh my gosh, that's a good question. I wish I had the answer to that question. We do not have enough research to even answer the question of why THC is effective so she's referring to the anti-tumor properties that THC has and the pro-apoptotic properties, which means it tells a cell that's not acting well to go ahead and allow itself to die. And so we don't really know enough about why THC is effective to answer the question of which version is actually exerting those properties. And so the reason why that question is good is because it helps us to know what version should we be focusing on and what people should be actually ingesting. And if THC is it, or if it's the precursor or the metabolite. That's a good question I don't know the answer to.
All right, folks, thank you so much for these great questions. We're running out of time. I'd like to just take a quick pulse check from the audience. We have on our schedule to take about a 10-minute break right now. Raise your hand if you'd like to do that right now. Okay, and raise your hand if you'd Dr. Sisley, Dr. C. Sisley. Dr. Sisley is an Arizona-based physician practicing internal medicine and psychiatry. She is president of the Scottsdale Research Institute and best known for serving as principal investigator for the only FDA-approved randomized controlled trial in the world, examining safety and efficacy of smoked marijuana flower in combat veterans with severe post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. Dr. Sisley is striving to put smoked and vape flower through the entire FDA drug development process to eventually be on the market to treat chronic pain, opioid dependence, and PTSD, and then urge health insurance companies to pay for dry flowers similar to conventional pharmaceuticals. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Sisley.
I love this state. It's, I'm from Arizona, where we're similar politics, similar kind of libertarian leaning, supporting, fighting for personal liberty. And so that's what's so surprising. I didn't ever expect Texas to be the holdout on reforming cannabis law. I thought for sure you guys would at least beat Utah. And I'm just astonished that this is still, we're still struggling with this. But I'm thrilled that you all came out and, took time out of your busy lives to be here. Let me, and I'm going to go over, and then we'll jump right in. They've given me quite a bit of time, so I'm just going to let you guys settle in, and we're going to talk about a lot of random topics, and hopefully you'll see how these all string together here. I'm going to give you, I've met several of you already, but I'm going to, for those I haven't met, I want to give you some background on what we're doing in the lab. So as she mentioned, we're best known for this FDA-approved controlled trial looking at military veterans with PTSD. And many of you have been following this saga for years. We've been fighting the government to execute this trial. You can see here the study, after 7 years of struggle with the government, finally commenced back in 2016. And I'm proud to tell you that we did complete the study in 2019 despite relentless governmental barriers. These are my collaborators, and my primary study sponsor is MAPS. Many of you know MAPS is a very dynamic nonprofit that's spearheaded a lot of the psychedelic research in the country. And they stood by me through all the ups and downs of this study. So for those of you I haven't met, I've been a Scottsdale resident for over 30 years. I'm mostly, practicing primary care medicine, even though I'm boarded in psychiatry too. I'm mostly, in a clinic where I don't actually write recommendations for cannabis because Arizona law doesn't allow me to do that, and I'm also serving as a volunteer medical director for some of our license holders. So I don't have any ownership in the industry. I really want to emphasize that. I don't own equity in any of these for-profit entities. I'm just interested in the research side and collecting objective data on how does cannabis work, how it doesn't work, and I want to talk with you about that today. The first bullet point was true for 46 years of my life. I've never tried, and I was proud to say I'm a lifelong Republican that's never used cannabis, and that was very effective in Arizona where it's so hyper-conservative, and that really helped me navigate a lot of these barriers. But a couple of years ago, I got diagnosed with breast cancer, and I decided at that point, I did all the traditional surgery, radiation, but in the end, I decided to start experimenting with cannabis to try to prevent recurrence. And I want to show you some of our research that informed my choice on this, and I'm not encouraging people to go down that path. I'm just saying that there is data to support this. So this was a study we did. This is actually using synthetic cannabinoids, because at that time at the University of Arizona, of course, they were terrified of the green leafy substance. So we could only use synthetic cannabinoids, and we basically these are breast tumor cells in a petri dish, and you can see when the synthetic cannabinoid was introduced that there's a dramatic reduction in the density of these breast tumor cells. And so that was pretty persuasive to me. You can see here we were working with mice models, and you can see that, we injected a synthetic cannabinoid into the intraperitoneum. It basically looks like we're injecting it into the gut of the mice. And these were all mice models with cancers. There you can see that there was a slower progression of their primary tumor and less incidence of metastasis in these mice that had received the synthetic cannabinoid. So I was persuaded enough by this that I thought, I'm going to break my lifelong abstinence to cannabis, and I started using a high THC oil, and I'm only 2 years out, but so far so good. Screenings have been negative, so I'm going to keep pushing forward with this, but I want to always caution people about, certainly we know that cannabis has some profound anti-cancer properties, and there was just an article recently, if any of you are interested, there was a meta-analysis of all of these articles looking at cannabis for anti-cancer activity, and they summarize saying, it's clear that there really is some power to this theory, but obviously we desperately need randomized controlled trials in humans in order to really codify this. But I think it's impressive. I just want to caution us not to be too extreme. I think when activists are talking about cannabis curing all cancer, that's problematic, and it starts to discourage members of our medical community who think we're being too extreme. So I would caution you to use more moderated language, like it has anti-cancer properties. This was a nonprofit that we founded about 6 years ago now, called Doctors for Cannabis Regulation. So I put this out as a disclosure about my personal views on cannabis, that I believe strongly that we should have never criminalized cannabis, and that's why we launched a nonprofit for physicians. It's called Doctors for Cannabis Regulation, in an effort to create a safe harbor for doctors to talk openly about their desire to end cannabis prohibition. Because if you talk to most doctors confidentially, like I'm sure Olga sat in many doctor lounges where when we're talking amongst each other, we all agree that this was absurd, that our government ever criminalized a natural plant, especially one that is as benign as cannabis, and that we're torturing people and throwing people in cages for this. So anyway, keep an eye. If you want to read more about this group, if you go to dfcr.org, we have our Declaration of Principles on there, and a lot of background information about where we came up with these ideas. And if you know of doctors who care about the public policy side of this, please encourage them to go to this website. So let me tell you a little bit more about how we entered into this cannabis research. Basically, I've been treating military veterans and their families and first responders for like 20 years now. I was in practice with my mom when we were, about probably 15 years ago. These folks would start disclosing to me reluctantly that they were using cannabis to treat some of the symptoms that I was targeting with conventional medicine, and I was really impressed with that they were getting tremendous clinical benefits, way better than what I was achieving with standard pharmaceuticals. And so ultimately I decided, even though I was still skeptical, and I'm a scientist, so I'm inherently skeptical of everything until I see data from randomized control trials, but I felt like, look, at least we owe it to these folks to study it in a controlled environment. And so that's how we started embarking on this research. And ultimately, we were terminated from the U of A. The University of Arizona was where I graduated from medical school. I was in excellent standing until I became the principal investigator on cannabis research that put me at odds with an administration that did not value this work. And we created a PAC called Americans for Scientific Freedom, because as I started to dive into this further, I realized the myriad ways that our U.S. government had systematically impeded cannabis research for decades, and it made me, so frustrated to see what was happening, and so this is what the PAC was about. And so actually getting fired from the university was one of my proudest professional achievements. I had no idea, a lot of people might have considered this professionally devastating, but in my case, I was so happy to be able to stand up to these giant institutions that are deliberately impeding this work. And ultimately, it turned out to be a huge victory for us because we ended up with relentless amounts of media coverage that helped us highlight the barriers to cannabis research, but even more importantly, helped us talk about the epidemic of veteran suicide. And that was the study that was being blocked at the university, was this veteran PTSD study. And the fact that our university president didn't want the optics of veterans smoking weed on campus. They thought that would be problematic for their public image. But this turned out to be a wonderful gift that really propelled the research forward. We had all kinds of prominent figures, like many of you know. Andy Weil is a Harvard-trained physician and botanist who was, at that time, he was a department chair at the University of Arizona at the medical school. He was the head of integrated medicine. And he came out with this open letter to the media condemning his own university president. So that was really powerful, and he continues to be an ally for us in our research. And so I feel really indebted to folks like him. And, here's John Oliver, kind of calling out the government, talking about these barriers to our research. So we were lucky to have folks who had the courage to come out. And that's part of why I speak openly about my own use of cannabis now, is because I realize how important it is for professionals to talk publicly about our own personal use, because we have to normalize this and start to help people realize that people from all walks of life are using this plant. And so so ultimately we ended up in our own private institute, right? This is the best way to do cannabis research in the country. We're a private nonprofit, so we don't have to deal with all the relentless bureaucracy of the university system. I don't need, 6 signatures for every decision I need to make. And so we're much more agile here. We ended up, after getting tossed out of the university, we ended up with this, $2 million grant from the state of Colorado. You'll notice that this is a state level grant, right? So the issue is there hasn't been really any federal funding to look at cannabis as a medicine in research trials. The only studies that are funded by our government, NIH, NIDA, SAMHSA, they've all been safety studies, right? Looking at harmful effects of cannabis or addiction potential of cannabis. So for the first time, the state of Colorado, they had like $13 million that had been generated through their medical cannabis program, a surplus money. And they said, you know what? We want to invest in cannabis research, looking at efficacy, right? Looking at cannabis as a medicine and not a drug of abuse. And so they took $10 million of the $13 million through a legislative bill, and they plowed it into these different projects. They basically, funded everything from cannabis for treating Crohn's disease to looking at cannabis for pediatric brain tumors. And our that were awarded, and now you're going to see data now being published over the next year or two from all these trials that are now being finished. But I think this is our best hope for funding cannabis research around the country is to urge states to allocate the money, since we can't rely on, our federal government feels so conflicted because they're telling you, in the same breath, they're telling you cannabis is a Schedule I drug that has no medical benefit, then how could they possibly fund clinical trials looking at cannabis as a medicine? That's been their, the confusion for them. And so instead we've had to reach out to the states where they care about this and urge them to do this. So the reason we've been fighting so hard for studies like this one, the Veterans Trial, is because this is the first and only controlled trial in the world looking at cannabis for treating PTSD, if you can believe it. You'd think that there'd be tons of studies on this, but no, in fact, it hasn't. I'm going to tell you more about that. But, so after so many years of struggle with the government, I finally got this, what they call the DEA Schedule I license, which is, many scientists refer to this as the golden ticket that allows you to purchase, to give the privilege of purchasing cannabis from our federal government. And, as soon as we received this, we got, I immediately moved to order 8 kilos of cannabis for our trial, our veteran study. And, I'm thinking, surely this is going to come by like armored truck or some secure, but there's the FedEx guy shows up at the door of our lab. He has no idea he's transporting cannabis. He's mystified why everybody's so excited about it. It's been so many years of battling the government. And so we opened this up, and we're thinking, there's going to be gorgeous mountains of beautiful flower, and then there's this green powder in these sandwich bags that barely resembles cannabis at all, right? It's just full of stems, sticks, seeds, leaves, and this is what's really disheartening, as you can imagine, because we were all concerned, including the veterans, that this was going to sabotage our outcomes. And you can see, I don't know if you can get a sense here, there's very little flower in there. Most of this is extraneous plant material. This is actually the placebo. So this looks the same as all the other batches. It's basically the same material that's been alcohol washed. So they leach out all of the cannabinoids and terpenes. So it's just inner plant material. But you can see here, this monopoly has existed since 1968, right? So over 50 years, the government has enforced a monopoly at the University of Mississippi, deeming that they're the only entity allowed to grow cannabis for research. And for the past 50 years, it's been grown in this small 12-acre farm outdoors in Mississippi, which, as we know, the humidity there, it's like a formula for mold, growing mold and mycotoxin. But yeah, and so the tough thing is every single controlled trial in the U.S. for the last 5 decades has been forced to use that material. We weren't allowed to use anything else, and still are not. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how we're trying to overcome this monopoly, but in the meantime, I just want to give you a sense of how this is created, right? So this is Dr. El Soli, who's a very respected scientist at UMass. And he's got his hand in a barrel of ground up cannabis flower. And that's what they do, is basically take the entire plant from root to tip, throw it into a grinder. Not like these, actually, let me see if I have a picture here. So what happens is they get sent, when we unroll, they usually come in these rolled up cigarettes. So when we dump them out, you can see that this is the high focus, where you can see that this is not just flour, right? It's a lot of junk in there that dilutes the efficacy of the flour and harms our outcomes. So we were the first scientists to actually do secondary independent testing on the cannabis. cannabis. If you can believe that the scientists who received this cannabis for so many years, none of them sent it out. And you think, why isn't there some intellectual curiosity about, like, how do you even know that's cannabis, right? Wouldn't a scientist want to confirm that that's what that is? Nobody has done that because it is so complicated. You can't just send it to any lab in the country. You have to send it. There's a chain of command with DEA licensees where you have to send it to a DEA Schedule I lab, and there's tons of forms that have to be filled out. But the problem is the DEA doesn't disclose who has the license. It's secret. So we had to cold call labs all over the country until we finally found one that would take the material and went through all the process, and then came back with, you know, this data showing excessively high levels of mold and lead in all the batches that would have never passed state testing in any regulated market. And when I asked the NIDA, the National Institute on Drug Abuse, who runs the monopoly, I said, you know, what was your mold count? And they said, oh, we've never tested for mold. And I was just, astonished, because you would think that would be so basic. You know, we're administering cannabis often to immunosuppressed patients in studies, right? A lot of the studies done were on cancer patients who are on chemo, MS patients who are on biologics. So these people, you wouldn't want to give them moldy cannabis and have them inhaling that into their lungs. But the FDA has felt comfortable to release it. They're in charge of releasing the study drug to scientists, and they've felt comfortable all these years to do that without even knowing the mold count. So I don't know if I have a picture here. Well, I wanted to show you. So when we came out, you know, the data, obviously we shared this with the media because we wanted to be very transparent with the public about what was happening, and that sort of went viral. We started seeing all these headlines about the quality of the cannabis being, the total swag. So I think this confirmed what people already believed about the flower from the government. But what happened was, when we came out publicly with this summary of the data, we lost our partner at Johns Hopkins. So after I had gotten fired from University of Arizona, we created a partnership with Johns Hopkins to split the study protocol. So half would be enrolled at Hopkins, half at my site in Phoenix. Suddenly they dropped out because they did not want to be associated with scientists that were questioning the government. They can't afford that, right? They get like $2 billion in federal grant money every year, so they can't be aligned with scientists who are criticizing the quality of the study drug. So ultimately, we lost them, but it turned out to be a huge gift, because they were highly bureaucratic and slowing us down. We were much more efficient without them, but we wanted that, that credibility that comes with being associated with the university. I want to slide over here for a second. If I can take you to a couple things. I want to show you the reason that we got interested in this PTSD study, right, is because we were seeing that the medicines that were available from our government were often no better than placebo, right? You can see here the two medications, the only two that have ever been approved by the FDA for treating PTSD is Zoloft and Paxil. That's it. All these other drugs that we use to treat PTSD are all being used off-label. Nobody's ever formally tested them for PTSD, or if they have, they didn't show that they were more beneficial than placebo. So I just want to give you a glimpse of how insane this is. Right? So all of these meds on this list are all considered okay to treat for PTSD. Like, nobody would criticize me. I can use all the drugs, all the antidepressants I want from any class, all of the sleep aids, all of the medications for bipolar disorder, all of the antipsychotic meds. None of these have been tested or deemed suitable for PTSD, but nobody would criticize me for using any of these. And so that's why you can imagine imagine why PTSD patients are so disgusted with the medical system, because they get put through the ringer of all these prescriptions that aren't really helping them. They get pummeled with one prescription after another, and often they'll snowball onto 8 or 10 different prescriptions, all to treat this one disorder. And yet here we see, in Israel and Canada, where we have the governments there not only allowing legal access for their veterans, but fully sponsoring the cost of cannabis for their vets, with not just with PTSD, right? The veterans are using it for pain, for all sorts of illnesses, and it's fully subsidized by the taxpayers in Israel and Canada. So I think that's a really worthy model for our country, and I wish that, and these governments were willing to accept the existing data as enough evidence that this was warranted. They didn't say, we need more science, there's not enough data to support it. No, they said, and they did this years ago. So I'm hoping that our government will come around and listen to the people on this. Let me just finish up with a couple things here. Saw this groundbreaking report. The National Academy of Science put this out in 2017. This is exciting when you see a federal agency acknowledging the medical benefits of cannabis. It was pretty shocking because, in one breath they're saying cannabis has no medical benefit, and here's one of their highly respected agencies admitting that, this is a renowned committee of scientists from around the world who evaluated over 10,000 articles on cannabis, and they ranked them in terms of scientific credibility. And they decided that there was strong scientific evidence to support cannabis use for treating chronic pain, for treating nausea and vomiting, and for treating the spasticity of multiple sclerosis. So if you're an activist in the audience, if you haven't seen this tool or used this document, I would really, sadly it is 400 pages, but if there is an executive summary at the front, it gives you everything you need. And the good thing is it's available electronically. If any of you don't have it, come find me after, and I'll email you the document, the PDF of this, so you can use it when you're talking to your elected officials. Whoever needs this information, you can just share that with them directly. You can see that there's really strong data to support these different areas, but also interesting that things like epilepsy, even though we know that there's strong evidence to support use of cannabis for epilepsy, especially CBD-rich products, that did not come out. You saw what the results of the NAS report were, and at that time there was, the Epidiolex studies and others that hadn't yet been published, so they did not have a chance to review that. So there are some limitations to this report. And think about all the other medical conditions that cannabis is associated with helping. None of those made it to the final summary, and I think that speaks volumes about how the study drug is being harmed. The study outcomes are being harmed by this low-quality study drug. So let me just show you this to finish this out. This is Nora Volkow, the head of NIDA. She is probably one of the biggest cannabis prohibitionists in the country, right? She's been, reporting for years that cannabis is dangerous and addictive. And suddenly, in a recent lecture I attended, I asked her for the slides afterwards, because you can see that she even is admitting now, you can say, when she's talking about what cannabis, or what treatments for pain are currently available, and even she's acknowledging that So this is a big breakthrough. I would say the data that supported using cannabis for pain came from the Big Small. Many of you know about Sativex, right? Sativex and the Big Small is a generic name. This is nothing fancy, right? It's just a simple 1-to-1 ratio of THC to CBD, right? It's readily available at any regulated market. You can buy this, but you know, the GW Pharmaceuticals have of course patented this and made it sound like this is something really unique when it's not. But the point is, if this was what was the primary study drug in all of these, you can see here, these were the pain studies that the NAS scientists, you know, for the NAS report, that they used this data to support their findings. And you can see that most of them are looking at Sativex, this extract, it's an oral mucosal extract spray that is half CBD, half THC, and it showed pretty extraordinary results for treating pain. But let me also bring you back to one other huge disadvantage. When you're doing science in the US, these clinical trials, we generally have always been forced to implement this fixed dosing model, right? So you can see here, this is Dr. Abrams' study. It's a study where he showed that inhaled cannabis was useful in treating HIV neuropathy, right? But it was only barely useful. So even though in the real world, when people are smoking or vaporizing natural flower, they get tremendous value from this. But when we try to replicate that in a clinical trial, it's very hard to do, because what happens is the FDA tells me and other scientists that we have to force people into fixed dosing, which we all know does not happen in the real world, right? In the real world, patients are using as little as they need. They start with a tiny amount, so like Dr. Olga said, go up slowly till you find that sweet spot that works for you, and then you stop. In this study, we forced people to take 50 milligrams 3 times a day, whether they needed it or not. And we know how dangerous that is. So over the years of negotiating with FDA, we finally persuaded them to allow for a patient self-titration model, right? And this was a huge achievement. I would say, I think that now that we've gotten FDA on board with this, I think this will benefit all plant medicine. Hopefully all botanical medicine will be allowed to use this patient self-titration, where patients start with the tiniest dose, go up slowly. This will prevent a lot of adverse events, because you can't probably read this here, but this is a table comparing the number of side effects from inhaled cannabis versus placebo. You can see the side effect rate is really high, and that's because we're forcing people into fixed dosing. When you do that, these people, of course, they're going to have high rates of sedation, of anxiety, of even psychosis, because they're taking way too much. And when when you see people using it in the real world, they're able to, adjust their amount to fit their needs, and that's what we're lacking in these clinical trials. Here's another bank of studies, all on multiple sclerosis. So I want to just show you, when you're elected here, because I've been to the legislature in Texas over and over again, and I've seen, Shivawn, can you hang on there? I just want to make sure he doesn't stop. Thank you, hon. I've been to the legislature here several times, and I've talked to the electeds and begged them to look at this science, and they still keep claiming that there's not enough data. But you can see an immense, thousands of controlled trials that have already been published looking at cannabis as a medicine, and so that's why let me jump to, I want to just show you real quick here. So this is, I want to thank Justice Grove for sharing these photos with me, because I want to give you a glimpse. So when you saw the green powder that we get from the government, I want to show you what is being destroyed, right? So if any of you have seen these great electron microscopy shots of a trichome, You can see how these are the glandular secretions that come out of natural, well-grown, sun-grown flowers, bursting with all these secretions here. And you can imagine when you look at cannabis from the government you're not going to see any of this. They've just been pulverized through this effort to make the study drug what they call GMP, good manufacturing process. They destroy all of this, and this is the medicine, right? The cannabinoids, terpenes, all of this are emanating from these trichomes. And let me see if I can show you. So this is what Justice Brown shared with me, just some of their bud material. You can see how this is a completely different situation, right? If I were allowed to use this in clinical trials, imagine how different the outcome would be. I'm pretty confident that we would see a completely different efficacy data here. And this is why we want to fight the government on this issue. So let me just end with this. I know I'm out of time, but I just want to give you, I want to share with you, I want to try to persuade you why we are focusing our research on bud, on dry flower. First of all, bud is the least expensive form of the flower. As Dr. Olga mentioned, the exorbitant cost. This is, the cost of buying cannabis in a regulated market can be brutal. They can impoverish these patients, and sticking with, raw flower has been incredibly helpful for making this manageable. It's still, despite what you hear all the time that, infused products are taking over and they're pushing out flower, nobody wants flower anymore. That's just not true. If you look at the data from health departments and legal markets, flower is still over 50% of sales in most legal markets. It's going to open the door for other botanical medicines. If we can that's our mission at Scottsdale Research Institute, is we are doing nonprofit drug development research to try to put natural flower through the entire FDA process so that eventually flower would be on the market with FDA approval, and that would force insurance companies to have to pay for flower. That would be the dream, that someday patients could actually go to a pharmacy, pick up an amber bottle full of bud material, and have their insurance pay for it. And this is why we have a nonprofit called Field to Heal, where that's what we do, is we only study natural plants. We don't look at synthetic cannabinoids, we don't look at synthetic psilocybin, we only look at natural mushrooms and natural cannabis flower and try to put it through the FDA process. So let me jump past this. I want to just finish out with this. So when people tell you, when you're elected, say, why isn't there more research? I think we need more studies. I want to just show you what we're up against here. This is a schematic I created so that you could see the ridiculous amount of government red tape involved in doing a single clinical trial in the U.S. Every one of these boxes represents a different agency at the state or federal level that we have to hurdle in order to get through to actually conduct a trial. So you wonder, why did it take us 10 years to do the veterans PTSD study? It's not just because we got fired from the U of A. That was really only a minor blip in the whole 10-year saga. It's this. This is what is preventing scientists from being able to do more research. It's a miracle that we have the number of studies that we have, and it's just from the sheer fortitude of a few really passionate scientists like Dr. Abrams and others who wanted, who were determined to pioneer this work. But most scientists look at this pathway and say, how could I possibly do this? How can I even put my toe in the water here when this is what I'm up against? So most scientists don't want to enter this arena because they see that it's impossible to conduct this kind of research. And I showed you this art. This is the cigarettes, by the way, that we used to get them in cigarette form. but their rolling machine is broken. So now we just get the loose cannabis at the bottom. Yeah, they could not purchase, it's too sticky, so they decided to send it out in bulk. But it's interesting here, you can see that on the top, you see how it was still, you could really discern all the stems, sticks, seeds, and leaves. They were getting so much criticism from folks like me that they decided to grind it into a powder now, so they wouldn't have to listen to us complaining. So the bottom one is the most recent version of what we're getting. So I want to just finish out by telling you, by trying to leave it on a hopeful note, right? We filed a lawsuit against the DC Circuit Court last year. Many of you heard about this because this actually emanated from two really expert attorneys here in Texas. If you know, the folks at Yetter, Coleman, and Houston took our case on pro bono. They were the only ones willing to do this for free because they were so disgusted with what they viewed as an attack on scientific freedom. And so we filed in the DC Circuit Court and we got a little bit of traction. We finally got the DEA to respond to our petition, and they announced that they would move forward and license other growers for research. Mind you, this is the same announcement that was made back in 2016. They already announced that one time, right? And over 30 people, 30 companies submitted applications in 2016 in response to this initial announcement. But DEA never processed, they took all of our money, right? They processed our credit cards, but never processed any of the applications. And so what's happened now is we're in the same quagmire where now we have a new announcement from the DEA saying, okay, we're gonna do it this time, we promise. They told the courts that they would move forward, and so the federal courts dismissed the lawsuit, saying, okay, the DEA has promised this time, and so you're good, let's dismiss the case as moot. And here we are, it's almost 6 months later, 7 months, and no movement. So I just want you to know that without the pressure from the federal courts on the DEA, I don't think we're ever going to see a solution to this. The bottom line is we haven't won anything. Despite all these nice headlines, we haven't won. If I get approved to do another study tomorrow, we're going to have the same situation where I'm going to have to buy cannabis from University of Mississippi because they haven't processed even one other application. But what I am allowed to do, let me see if I can show you this. What I am allowed to do is import cannabis from foreign growers, right? So our government is totally happy with me, allowing foreign companies from Canada, from Israel, to infiltrate our drug supply and bolster their market caps, right? All these companies, Tilray, Cannabis, they're exporting flower for clinical trials into the U.S. and putting out press releases. Their stock prices are soaring every time they send out these notices. But our government refuses to allow other domestic growers. All of our talented farmers in the U.S. that could be providing cannabis for our own research are being blocked. And this is an example. This is a study that I just got approved by the FDA to start. And I've been waiting months to find a single grower in Canada who can provide us flower. I refuse to buy cannabis from University of Mississippi. There's no point, right? I'm continually producing negative data. So instead, my only option is to buy from Canada. Let me see if I can show you. I wanted to show you this ridiculous. Let me see if I can find this real quick. Hang on 1 second. See if I can pull this up. Never mind. I can't find it. But this is, we attempted to import flower from a group called Afria. Many of you have heard of it. They've got the giant that multi-billion-dollar valuation. And when we helped them open up a drug master file with our FDA, and it showed the presence of 3 mycotoxin. And you would think that, surely that, they had to put out a press release acknowledging that their flower was contaminated. You think about their stock's probably going to nosedive. It didn't have any impact on their stock price, because in the end, these folks don't really care about the medicine. The Canadian flower is only maybe one step above University of Mississippi. It's really disheartening to see this, but this is the flower that I'm going to be required to use in this trial. And I don't know if you can see, let me show you real quick here. This study that we're doing, you can see we're looking at patients with advanced cancer, and we're going to be administering smoked cannabis flower to see if it helps their quality of life and their breakthrough pain. And we did a small pilot study comparing fentanyl to this. Let's see if I have another picture of this. No, we compared fentanyl to smoked flower, and the smoked flower performed so much better for their breakthrough pain. It was astonishing. Like fentanyl, even though it's like the nuclear bomb of the opioids, it took sometimes an hour to kick in. Whereas with the smoked flower, within minutes, these patients were getting relief, and that was really exciting because these folks are, their days are numbered, and they want to be able to enjoy their families and not be in pain all the time. And if inhaled cannabis can be a solution, then why are we preventing this? So I'm hoping that you guys can use this information to bring this forward. You're in the middle. The legislative session has started already in Texas, I guess. So, I forgot. You guys are every other year. Yeah. All right. So we'll ramp up to next year. We'll hopefully. I want to arm you guys with as much scientific data as possible, though. So please, I'm around for the rest of this. If you want to come up after and get my card, and I can, email you the NAS report, and I would love to stay in touch and help fortify your efforts. I was talking to the advocates last night, and you're saying how amazing it is what you guys, you're back every year in front of your elected officials trying to push this issue and get these reforms in place. And I just so admire y'all for having the tenacity to create a pathway for compassionate access for your patients here. I'm really, really proud of you, and I want to do whatever I can to help. So thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
Dr. Sisley. If we can hang tight for a couple more minutes, I'd like to introduce Nico Murillo. Nico Murillo is the board chair of Texans For Safe Access, a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to patient outreach and medical cannabis education. Texans For Safe Access is a part of Americans For Safe Access, based out of Washington, D.C., which has over 100,000 active members. Nico is a certified research chef with 20 years experience in professional kitchens. Nico has held numerous titles, most notably as product development chef for PepsiCo and Frito-Lay. She has dedicated her career to medical cannabis and helping patients. She applied to the Texas Compassionate Use Program and under the name Locana, and developed a hemp skincare line set to launch in 2020, Locana Skin. Nico is going to introduce our next speakers, and with that, I will hand it off to Nico.
Woo!
Thank you so much, Shivawn, and thank you so much to Justice Verone and the entire team that has come down to Texas to invest their time and obviously resources to help educate and expand our medical cannabis program. Again, my name is Nico Murillo. I'm the chair of Texans For Safe Access, and today I want to introduce some of our patient testimonials. At the core of our chapter, we believe that patient testimonials are the most impactful, and so it is at the core of our website. If you go onto that, txsafeaccess.org, you can see several of our patient testimonial videos. Some of those people are in the room today. of our patient testimonials, Amy and Jane Novacek. Most of y'all may know Jane Novacek as a former Dallas Cowboy footballer. Sorry, tongue twisted there. Cowboy footballer. And his wife Amy, they're going to share a very personal and emotional story about their son that was tragically injured. And so I want to introduce them up, and then I'll introduce our other speakers, Mark and Christy, right after them. So thank you all again for being here, for all of the guests coming, and of course for this great venue for hosting us.
Thank you for having us. Jay's going to sit, but if you guys have questions later. I really can't offer anything impressive like the doctor just did and everything else. We met Susan Hayes this last year. She's been very helpful for us. This is a painful story, so hopefully, I hope and pray don't cry. That's not my intention. Jay and I think if you would have asked us what we always say when we see people and talk to people, that if you would have asked 5 years ago, what is your opinion on cannabis? Medical cannabis, recreational cannabis? I don't know if we would have had one. Neither one of us had ever tried it, had experience with it. Nobody in our family did. We probably would have said, it's the law and we just really don't support it. With like a lot of people, especially in our government in the state of Texas. Unfortunately, our first encounter was when our son was hazed in October of 2015 at the University of Oklahoma. He had been homeschooled his last 2 years in high school because he had his own show on ESPN. He was a broadcasting prodigy and started this at 15 years old. This was his destiny, and he had worked so hard, diligently. It was his passion. And fortunately enough, we were blessed with Jay being in the industry that we could maybe open a few doors for him, but he did all the work. Getting to college, he had a partial scholarship. Didn't want to really do the fraternity. He knew what he wanted to do, and it was hard work that he'd been doing. Last minute, he was recruited. He did the fraternity. Fast forward to October 2015. That evening, the pledges were sober. The members were not. One thing led to another, and after midnight, he was secluded in a room by himself with another member. One thing led to another. This member was highly agitated, hit him with a baseball bat in the stomach. He fell back, hit his head on a marble windowsill. Today, he suffers with traumatic brain injury, brain damage to the front, side, and back lobes of his brain. He also has epilepsy, none of which he had prior to October of 2015. Prior to this, in college, this fraternity was very pro-drinking and drugs. Very pro. Matter of fact, they had a house very close to campus that is designated only for drug use. And I don't mean smoking cannabis, I mean every drug cocktail you can think of. And they had funding for it. The alumni actually purchased this house for that. Blake was not pro-drugs whatsoever. He wasn't even really a big drinker. He participated in some of this, but it was not his thing prior to October 2015. Just said no, but thank you, and went forward. After his, I say, it's not really an accident, it was an assault. This happened to him. He found himself in a haze that you do after a lot of brain injuries, and I have one too. I mean, you just don't realize that's what it is. I mean, you kind of walk around in a fog and a haze, and you can't remember anything, you can't function. Everything about you is different. His was severe enough. He laid in his dorm room for weeks, didn't go to class. We didn't know. We were here. We knew something was wrong. Jay and I would say, what is going on? Something's wrong with our son. His grades were falling. We would reach out. We didn't know till December he came home that this happened. I was actually in a doctor's office with him, and he told me, and I can't tell you as a parent how earth-shattering this is, and you don't know what to do. Let's fast forward to, I think 2017 when he was arrested. We knew he was using marijuana when he got home from school in 2016. Can't say that we were really excited about it, but we had a kid that was not the kid we sent off to school. Something was strange, something was unusual. We knew that the incident had happened. We did not know the absolute effects yet. We were taking him to doctors. Of course, there were the medications. We were still in stirrups trying to put pieces together, one by one. But the marijuana that he was smoking, we kind of had him back. I mean, he was semi-functional. Can't say the memory was fully there, but he could do some day-to-day tasks as were before he couldn't. He was functional, you know, just not normal, but better. In the state of Texas, marijuana is illegal, so it's not like we can go to the grocery store, Sam's, and buy our weekly dose, right? So when he was getting it, he was getting large amounts, and actually he had gone from the flour to the wax. It was easier, and I am not educated on this, so feel free to educate me, but I have, thank you to Susan and to our son and to some doctors and the education. So if I trip and missay something, please pardon me, but he was pulled over with a good sum of wax. I think it was, Susan, do you remember?
I don't remember, but it's easy to pull a felony.
Right, so I think he wound up one speeding ticket, so he is a felon. Our son that was on scholarship is a felon in the state of Texas. 10 years probation, by the way. In some of his meetings that he had to attend, I believe there was a child molester and somebody that tried to burn down their boyfriend's house had 5 years probation. Our son has 10 years probation. And actually, I think we've 1 year behind us, so we have 9 more to go. Hopefully, maybe we can deal with that at a later point, because now we're in a humongous lawsuit with the fraternity. Painful and nightmare. Anyway, back to the arrest. He had, I think the number was 4, what is it? What would it have been? I don't think 4 ounces, I don't know. Anyway. Okay, thank you. See? Pardon my ignorance, but that's what it is. Anyway, so he was arrested, and so kind of a blessing in disguise is that he had to be tested every week randomly, and then every month, and now he's tested every 3 months. But we do know for 1.5 years, until we were approved through CURT, the program here in Texas, that he was, I mean, he had no access to marijuana, none. He was having seizures. The seizures were controlled, and we weren't really aware of what they were. We just knew that, you know, he would drop to his knees and start drooling and staring, and we're just kind of like, hey, you know, what's going on here? What are you doing? What is this? You know, I talk about feeling ignorant as a parent. Anyway, the seizures went from maybe several a week to 4 that we knew of for sure a day. 4, maybe 50. They were, a lot of them, very, very silent. A lot of his seizures do now and did happen at night, which is terrifying, because I can't tell you as a parent, when you lay in bed, you have to get up in the morning, 4 in the morning, 2 in the morning, 7 in the morning, and I'm walking from my room to him. Is this the day when he's going to be dead in his bed? Now, mind you, he's going to something. And I hope that you never or a spouse have to wonder if your child is alive. And we're part of a group of parents in this hazing. He's 1 of 3 that's still alive. So there's her bed. And this is going to sound horrible. Pardon me, but you know, Jay and I said before, they know the outcome of the child, and as awful as it is, it's not daunting every day. And don't get me wrong, we're thankful. We're thankful every single minute of every single day that we have a chance to fight for him. But I still, every day, wonder, is this that day? You know, and we have this medicine he's on, and I believe it was May that we got to start using this oil, and it's not perfect. I mean, the amount of oil is so huge. I think the dispensary that we're using is the most. As a matter of fact, when the delivery guy brought it, he was like, "Are you sure there's supposed to be 10 bottles in here?" 10. He has to take 5.5 syringes twice a day. Imagine how much oil that is to get the amount of THC he needs. But we're down to maybe 2 or 3 seizures a week from multiple a day, so we're thankful. I mean, that's, you know, I don't know, I'm sure you guys know that epilepsy and seizures, I mean, you can die. So that's a lot less chance that we have of dying. So I'm thankful for that. It's been a fight. We met Susan and a bunch of people when we went down to testify the last session. Again, all we do is have our story. We don't have the education behind it. We don't have the experience. I'm recovering from a traumatic brain injury from a horrible car accident. I'm sure that all the opioids I have in my house could be replaced by this medicine too, but we don't need 2 felonies in our family. One's enough, thank you. But I will tell you, the medicines prior to getting the cannabis, and mind you, we have Marinol legally, that we can subsidize because he has severe and extreme PTSD along with the other wonderful things that we've been given. The pain that he's been through, the headaches, we still haven't been able to control. And of course, when he has these horrid migraines, he has seizures. The plethora of pills that the doctors have given us, some of them made him suicidal. He spent 2 different weeks in an institution because he wanted to die. He wanted to kill himself. The opioids, the benzodiazepines. I mean, I've got more drugs in my home that I could start my own pharmacy if I wanted to. Not that we would, but I mean, it's ridiculous. I had a doctor say, well, let me just give you a fentanyl patch. You know, that'll help some of the pain. And he stood up. Now remember, this is the drug addicted felon, right, in the eyes of Texas. He said, absolutely not. I can't get him to take the Xanax. I can't get him to take the opioids when the pain is so bad. He won't. He's not an addict. He never has been an addict. He just doesn't like the pain. And Jay and I want to share this story. We want to make a difference. We want to help you guys, help other people. We have our insurance agent. She messaged us before we went down to Austin and said, I just want you guys to know that I'm appreciative and thankful for what you're doing. You're taking a platform I know you didn't think that you would ever be doing and speaking up for something important. And my son that's 40 years old has seizures. So thank you. Fast forward to this year, I talked to her about something different. I asked her, I said, hey, how's your son? She said, he died. He died a few months ago, but thank you for asking. I said, what happened? Died from a seizure in his sleep. Did you ever get the medicine? No, we didn't have access to it. And a lot of people, you guys, I mean, for us, the amount that he's on is $6,000 a month plus. How can a lot of people afford that? I mean, a single mom the kid has epilepsy or is autistic, tell me how they can afford that. Not to mention, and I know there's other people when you speak, but we know the whole flower works for Blake, and I don't know the dynamics of that except that we've been talking in the dispensary, and between the dispensary and Blake, we know the whole flower works. There's not the whole flower in the oil he's taking. So will he have seizures for the rest of his life? Probably so. Until he can possibly have a whole flower dynamic in some kind of oil or something that's legal. I don't know. Are there answers to his brain injury, to his epilepsy, to his PTSD? I don't know. I'd love and hope and pray to think that we can be better, but until then, we're alive, and that's what matters. So if anybody wants to know or have questions or contact us to help us, please let me know. In the meantime, thank you for putting these wonderful people together and helping us.
So thank you so much, Amy, for sharing that. That was pretty powerful. I think we all agree that safe access is important for Texans, and so we commend you for standing up for this for us. And next I want to introduce Christy Zartler. Christy and Mark Zartler sit on our current board at Texans For Safe Access. They're part of our founding board members, and so I want to recognize them and their contribution to help us financially to get the chapter to Texas. They were big players in that. So. And they also guided us in setting the foundation of our chapter, being patient-focused forward and introducing all-inclusive values to this medical program. And so I wanted to introduce Christy and let her tell the story of her daughter, Kara Zartler. Many of y'all know this story, but it's equally as powerful. And so thank you, Christy and Mark, for being part of our organization and being here today.
I'm so thrilled everyone's here. This is really a dream come true for me to have the professionals here to teach Texas and Texas patients the wonderful beauty of this plant, this healing plant. I'm sort of a survivor of a stroke. I had a cerebral hemorrhage when I was pregnant with my twins. My twins were born at 26 weeks premature. One of my twins was 1 pound, 12 ounces. She suffered a brain bleed the first 12 hours of life. It was really hard for me to learn how to speak and read again because my brain damage was in the left temporal lobe, and I could think of the words and the sentence, but it wouldn't come out of my mouth. So if I stall, please forgive me. It also must be a blessing from God because my daughter Karen is nonverbal. She can't speak. She was born early, I said that. At 15 months of age, she was at the well child checkup. She was diagnosed with cerebral palsy. Then about 3 and a half, she was diagnosed with autism. At 4, she was diagnosed with severe autism, which means that she has self-injurious behavior, or SIB. And I see some of the autism moms in the audience. Thank you for coming. We did not put her on antipsychotic medications or schizophrenic medicines until the FDA approved risperidone for 6 and up. So when she turned 6, we put her on risperidone, and she became a zombie. We tried therapies, we had scans done, we tried everything you can think of. Being in the medical profession, I'm a pediatric nurse practitioner, so I was floored at what we could do. We tried everything. When she was 11, one of our neighbors, who we used to play, some poker with, he was kind of a hippie family. They grew their own vegetables. They handed us a brownie. It was a cannabis-infused brownie. And my husband and I were not sure, her being on so many medications and me being a nurse practitioner, knowing that's a bad drug, it's illegal. We gave it to her, and it was a life-changing experience. And for several years, we tried different, ways to help her. It was, when she was 14 that I decided I'll tell her neurologist. I told her pediatrician, her developmental pediatrician, her neurologist, her psychiatrist. They said, keep doing it. They said, don't stop. We can see how well she's doing. That's when I decided to go to the Capitol in 2015 when the session started. I was so naive. I thought, I'm going to go down there and tell the lawmakers exactly what works for my daughter and how my life is horrible and barely worth living. And they didn't care. They didn't care. So, in 2017, My husband posted a video on Facebook, and I don't know if anybody saw it, but 100 million people did. I don't know if anybody here saw it, but she has a Facebook page, Kara Zartler, and we have some videos that you can view. But it is a video of us giving her a vapor mask with her nebulizer mask, with a tabletop vaporizer, and that medicine gives her relief within 3 to 5 minutes, and it is so helpful. It's a miracle. It's a miracle. So we're felons probably, but we were careful. We had our house kind of tightly fixed to where we if they came knocking on our door, we tried not to have a felony in the house. So we had green flour plus the tabletop vaporizer. And it took about 12 days, and CPS shows up. And they didn't want her. They decided she was too hard for them. They left her home with us, and I was able to get an attorney who sits on the board of the Dallas County Child Protective Services, and so I hired their attorney, really. So she was on our side, and it worked beautifully. But then again, in 2017, our legislature didn't do much to help us. So, and then again in 2019. So basically what I need is I need to be able to grow it in my backyard in organic soil, and I need to be able to give it to my daughter on a day-to-day basis in any form, on salads, in oils, through the vaporizer. So even though she has cerebral palsy, which gives her the spasticity diagnosis, and she has autism, and now she has seizures. She had her first seizure a year ago in December, and the teacup isn't going to help us because we need whole plant and high THC, which helps her SIB. So, does anybody have any questions? I just wanted to share my story. Thank you for listening, and thank you for coming.
Thank you both. That was incredibly moving. I appreciate your